Hey, it's Pete. Let's get into it. Bitcoin's price shot up more than 7% this week on the news that Grayscale Investments won its lawsuit against the SEC for denying the conversion of their GBTC product into an ETF. Today, we're talking about how this monumental victory affects the chance of a spot Bitcoin ETF getting approved in the near future and how that approval would affect Bitcoin adoption. The epic battle between the SEC robo-puppet Gary Gensler and everyone that's attempted to launch a spot Bitcoin ETF hit a milestone early this week when an appeals court ruled in favor of Grayscale Investments, which has desperately been trying to convert their shitty GBTC product into a spot Bitcoin ETF for years. Here's the most important line from the judge's ruling. Quote, "The denial of Grayscale's proposal was arbitrary and capricious because the commission failed to explain its different treatment of similar products. We therefore grant Grayscale's petition and vacate the order." The DC Circuit called bullshit on the SEC's ruling that Grayscale's ETF proposal was not designed to prevent fraudulent and manipulative acts and practices. This is an embarrassing defeat for the SEC, as they've spent the better part of a decade denying spot Bitcoin ETF proposals under that very reasoning. Grayscale CEO Michael Sonnenschein joined Bloomberg TV to discuss the victory. Let's roll the clip.
Yesterday was the culmination of more than a year worth of litigation. The SEC denied GBTC's conversion to an ETF. We immediately filed a lawsuit. 14 months later now, we finally got a decision from the DC Circuit, and a panel of 3 judges unanimously voted and agreed with Grayscale, and that actually vacates the SEC denial order. Huge win for Grayscale, huge win for our investors, and really the crypto and investment community as a whole.
But there's a process here to the point that you're making, and there is a chance that the SEC looks to broaden this out, potentially fight the decision, bring this in front of a larger array of judges. And so if you're thinking about that potential process ahead, do you have any concerns that the race to bring an ETF to the market will leave you behind?
Well, so today is day 1 of a 45-day period during which the SEC has the ability to request a rehearing. Ultimately, at the end of that 45-day process, you could expect a final mandate from the court with operational next steps. Now, of course, in the interim, our attorneys are going to be working proactively with the SEC to try and make this conversion as expeditious as possible. But we really do need to ensure during this period we're adhering to the federal rules of the appellate court.
Do you need to refile for an ETF? And if you do need to refile or amend, are there certain things that you would add, such as a surveillance sharing agreement? Do you worry that the ones that already have one have a competitive advantage to your filing?
Well, so the operational next steps on anything that Grayscale will or won't have to do will be contained in that final mandate that comes out of the court. But one of the interesting things that we actually got from the court in yesterday's decision was that the court agreed with us that the arguments we've been putting forward all along throughout this process are such that the SEC already has the tools it needs to approve spot Bitcoin products like GBTC, that there is sufficient surveillance between the CME, where Bitcoin futures trade, and national securities exchanges like the New York Stock Exchange, where we intend to list GBTC as an ETF. So there really shouldn't be any further grounds like the SEC has been relying on to continue denying these types of products from coming to market.
Bloomberg ETF analyst James Sefford broke down how the SEC might react next in a series of tweets, writing, quote, "This is a complete and utter rebuke of all the SEC spot Bitcoin ETF denial orders. There is no wiggle room. Basically, all of the SEC's arguments are shot down here. But the decision is going back to the SEC. So what can the SEC do? First option is that they just approve a GBTC conversion and spot ETF applications like all of crypto Twitter hopes. But if the SEC wants to stop Bitcoin ETFs from listing, they have 2 main options in my eyes. First, they would have to revoke the listing of Bitcoin futures ETFs. The order here from the DC Circuit basically said you can't argue about manipulation of markets while allowing Bitcoin futures ETFs. I still think this is quite unlikely. The second potential avenue is to deny on reasons not used before/yet, which I have been saying for months could have to do with custody or settlement of Bitcoin, which is not something that futures ETFs have to worry about. SEC has made a lot of noise around custodians. We've already seen how aggressive the SEC can get via Staff Accounting Bulletin 121, and it wouldn't surprise me if they lean on something related to custody to still deny these things if they really don't want these things to list. There's been a lot of hype about this, But it's important to note that while this does increase the chance that the SEC approves a spot Bitcoin ETF, it does not mean an approval is guaranteed or even imminent. It'll be interesting to see how the SEC responds to the ruling in the coming days. Will Gensler take the loss and gracefully pivot from his anti-ETF position by begrudgingly approving one? Or will he double down on bad policy and find yet another excuse to continue his rejections? All this ultimately means for Grayscale is that they get to hop back into the long queue of spot Bitcoin ETF applications, BlackRock's among them. There are currently a dozen, and 6 of those applications will hit their first decision deadlines in early September. Many analysts are raising their odds of an approval in 2023 by a significant margin following the ruling. Now, there is no question that a spot Bitcoin ETF approval would be bullish for the price of Bitcoin in the short term. There is a lot of money sitting on the sidelines just waiting for a product like this to launch so that they can get exposure through a familiar investment vehicle. The fact that we are seeing so much institutional interest in a Bitcoin ETF is yet another indicator that Bitcoin is moving further and further into the Overton window. Everybody wants a piece of that digital gold, which is hilarious because anyone that's actually studied Bitcoin for more than 5 minutes understands that it is so much more than that. Remember, kids, if you buy a Bitcoin ETF, you are not buying real Bitcoin. You're only gaining indirect exposure to Bitcoin via shares in a heavily regulated financial product. There are certain situations where it might make sense to buy a Bitcoin ETF, but if you do that, you lose access to the true innovation that Bitcoin provides. It's also extremely difficult, if not impossible, to convert those shares into real Bitcoin down the line. You'll probably end up having to sell your ETF shares, which means paying capital gains taxes, and then buy back the real thing. When you control your own private keys, and ideally run your own node, you gain access to a technologically superior form of money with a strict supply cap on top of a globally distributed, censorship-resistant, and scalable network. Bitcoin facilitates things like permissionless cross-border payments, rapid final settlement, and instant micropayments through layer 2 technologies like Lightning. These are but a few of the benefits you get from using Bitcoin as it's intended. At some point in the near future, Bitcoin's value beyond digital gold or as a simple savings vehicle will become apparent. If there is the slightest chance you think that you and your family would benefit from the transformative utility of the Bitcoin network, it is imperative that you get exposure to this technology the way Satoshi originally intended. Remember, not your keys, not your coin. What do you think? Is a spot Bitcoin ETF good or bad for Bitcoin adoption? Will Gensler finally admit defeat and crawl away to let the SEC approve one this year? Will BlackRock fight its way to the top and be the first to get a Bitcoin ETF approved? Leave a comment with your thoughts, like this video, and subscribe, or a pack of wild hyenas will tear you limb from limb and then steal all of your Bitcoin. That's a promise. Hey, it's Pete. God damn it.